Welcome to Gooseberry Science and Education videos. I'm your host, Alex. Now, right off the bat, you might notice that I'm an AI host. And honestly, we use AI here because it allows us to create better, rigorously vetted, and highly structured videos than human editors can most of the time. It's all about giving you the absolute most direct, factually accurate explainer possible. You'll also see our little orange gooseberry mascot popping up on screen to help us out today. So, what are we diving into? We're unpacking a really mind-bending lecture by the mystic Neville Goddard called Imagination plus Faith. It literally challenges everything we think we know about reality, proposing that our internal mental state is the absolute sole creator of our external world. Okay, let's just quickly check our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to define imagination and faith, break down the technique of assumption, look at a wild case study about escaping the army, explore states of consciousness, and finally talk about becoming the potter. So, diving right into Section 1, defining imagination and faith. We really gotta understand Goddard's unique lexicon before we can grasp his bolder claims.
Goddard's main thesis is, well, it's pretty radical compared to traditional Western thought. In his framework, when he uses the word God, he is absolutely not talking about some external entity or a deity located outside of yourself. No, he defines God strictly as the creative power of the human imagination. Literally, your imagination. He's super insistent on this. If you hear the word God, Lord, or Jesus, and your brain immediately jumps to something outside of your own wonderful human imagination, you've entirely missed his point. I mean, think about the weight of that for a second. Under this framework, you aren't waiting around for some outside force to grant your wishes, or hoping the universe just randomly aligns for you. The power center, it's entirely within your own mind. You are the operational force in your own life.
And then we have his definition of faith. He calls it the subjective appropriation of the objective hope. Sounds a bit academic, right? But what does that actually mean practically for us? Basically, it's the act of subjectively feeling a desired outcome as if it were already true right now, in the present moment. You don't just objectively hope for a goal way out there in the future, wishing for it someday. Instead, you appropriate it. You claim it by asking yourself, okay, what would this actually feel like if it were true right this very second? It's like, say you want a new job. Objective hope is sending out a resume and crossing your fingers. Subjective appropriation is sitting quietly and literally feeling the profound relief and excitement of holding that offer letter in your hands. You're completely shifting the experience from a future possibility to a present fact in your mind. All right, moving to Section 2, the technique of assumption. Let's look at how this method actually works mechanically. Goddard gives us a very specific step-by-step psychological visualization technique to make this happen. Step 1. Conjure a super clear scene in your mind's eye that implies your dream is already done. Not a scene of you working towards the goal, but the aftermath of it already being achieved. Step 2, and this is where the magic supposedly happens, you don't just picture a flat 2D image. You have to give it sensory vividness. Make it 3D. What are you touching? What are you seeing? What do you smell? Step 3. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Just completely dunk yourself in that mood of accomplishment or relief. And finally, step 4, which is honestly the toughest one for most people, ignore denying facts. You have to become totally oblivious to any physical evidence in the real world that contradicts you. Empty bank account, rejection letter on your desk, doesn't matter. You have to mentally bypass those physical facts and stay anchored entirely in your imagined scene. Let's ground this with Section 3, a real high-stakes case study. This is his famous World War II anecdote about escaping the army. So picture this. It's 1942, and Goddard gets drafted into the U.S. Army at nearly 38 years old. By March 1943, he's totally done and wants out. He applies for an honorable discharge, but his commanding officer, Colonel Bilbo, firmly disapproves it. And back then, those rules were final, zero appeals process. But Goddard, he just completely refused to accept those outside facts. That night, he goes to sleep in this cold, rigid Louisiana barracks, surrounded by dozens of other sleeping soldiers. But mentally, he assumed he was hundreds of miles away in his cozy New York City apartment. He leaned so hard into the sensory details to build the atmosphere. In his imagination, he walked from room to room, felt the familiar textures of his furniture, looked out his window at the recognizable layout of Washington Square. He made it undeniably real to his senses. He fell asleep in that state. Then, at 4 a.m., he wakes up from a vision of a hand holding a pen, crossing out the word disapproved on his application, and writing approved. And get this, exactly 9 days later, defying all military protocol of the time, he actually received a fully honorable discharge. No way, right? Now, during that 4 a.m. vision, Goddard noted that an internal voice told him something super specific. That which I have done, do nothing. This right here is the absolute crux of his method, and it goes completely against our modern culture. We are so obsessed with hustle. We're taught to force outcomes, network endlessly, and aggressively manipulate our physical circumstances to get what we want. But Goddard claimed this voice affirmed the internal mental work was completely finished. It required absolutely zero physical struggle, bribing, or arguing with his commanding officer outwardly. He had done the work in his imagination, so his only job in the physical world was to literally do nothing and wait for the assumption to harden into fact. And he applied this exact same framework repeatedly throughout his life. In another crazy case study, Goddard recounted being stranded on an island with his family. The situation was dire. There were massive wait lists, absolute panic among travelers, and definitively no ships available for the foreseeable future. But instead of giving in to the very understandable panic of being stranded, he sought calm. He vividly visualized standing on a boat, holding the ship's rail. He imagined the hard texture of the wood beneath his hands. He smelled that raw, biting ocean salt in the air while looking back at the island fading away. He completely anchored himself in the sensory reality of departure. Well, just 24 hours after employing this vivid sensory storytelling, while everyone else is still panicking on the wait list, he mysteriously gets a call granting immediate passage for him and his entire family. Let's move along to Section 4, States of Consciousness, and his brilliant concept of the traveler metaphor. Goddard illustrates his broader worldview through a really fascinating visual metaphor. He views human circumstances, things like poverty or wealth, sickness or health, joy or despair, as permanent states. Think of them like physical cities on a map. They exist permanently. New York City doesn't just disappear because you hop on a flight and leave it. The human being, however, is merely the pilgrim or the traveler who occupies a state temporarily. And there's a profound psychological relief in this concept. If you're currently experiencing a state of financial struggle or illness, Goddard is basically saying, hey, this is not your absolute identity. It's just a hotel you're temporarily visiting. You aren't the circumstance. If you don't like the state you're in, you shouldn't condemn it or feel shame. Instead, you simply use your imagination to travel out of it. You mentally pack your bags, move into a more desirable state, and leave the old one behind for someone else to visit. To validate his belief that the internal state always precedes external evidence, Goddard points to prominent historical figures like Winston Churchill. Churchill famously said, "The mood determines the fortunes of people rather than the fortunes determine the mood." Let's actually pause and think about that inversion for a second. Society constantly beats it into our heads that once we get the fortune, the promotion, the money, the perfect relationship, then we'll finally feel the good mood. We wait for the outside world to dictate our internal feelings. Goddard and Churchill in this context argue the exact opposite. Assuming a mood, literally catching the feeling of the state you want to be in right now, is what actually dictates your physical world. The mood must come first. The fortune inevitably follows. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, Becoming the Potter and Reworking Reality. So Goddard uses this great analogy of a potter working with clay. If a potter is spinning a vessel on a wheel and the clay gets all spoiled or misshapen, they don't just throw the clay away in disgust, right? They take it, smooth it out, and lovingly rework it into something new and beautiful. And that's the crucial takeaway here. This profound imaginative power comes with a fundamental ethical rule. Goddard insists on exercising imagination lovingly on behalf of everyone. Why does this rule exist? Because if imagination creates reality, then how you view others is exactly what they will become in your world. If a family member is struggling or you have a difficult coworker who constantly clashes with you, he advises that you don't just discard them as ruined or label them as toxic. Instead, you lovingly rework your view of them. You reshape them positively in your mind's eye as the person they'd ideally like to be, which anchors this highly abstract concept into an incredibly practical, everyday utility for improving your relationships. Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to ponder today. If objective reality is solely produced through imagining, exactly as Goddard claims, what will you imagine next? Whether you view this as literal truth or simply as a hugely powerful psychological framework for building your confidence, this philosophy challenges all of us to take total, uncompromising responsibility for our internal narratives. Our minds aren't just passively recording reality, they are actively broadcasting it. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the content.